Aitäh. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Simo Leisti and I'm the General Manager for Cisco in the Baltic countries and in Finland. And the ones who were listening to the last speaker, I can also introduce myself as the most conservative player in the market. So apparently the networking players are the most conservative. However, I would remind that approximately 30 years ago when the company was established, we came up with this technology called routing, which is the basis for the internet. And I think if we look at the world and the digitization, how it has been changed with the help of the internet technology, I think you might argue whether it's conservative or not what has happened. And also if we look at our history, and we decided approximately six years ago to enter the server market, which is a very traditional conservative market. After 5 years, we were the market leader in the x86 plate server market. So maybe that's not so conservative after all. But let's jump into the subject of today, and we're talking about the digitization, and that's of course something that everybody's discussing about. Let me give you the perspectives from us, how you can start enabling yourself to start going into the journey of digitization, and also what we see, what it really means, and how can you start embracing that. Of course, in the digital world, we see a lot of examples where the speed is what is really causing the major disruption. A couple of years ago, we were not even heard about Uber or the Airbnbs, and today they are the world's largest taxi company and the world's largest hotel company without owning those themselves. So what digital platforms and digitalization means is a massive disruption in all of the industries. And what we're talking about is that it's not only the companies that are being disrupted, it's also something that the government needs to think. How does government embrace digitization? And I can say that in Estonia, you are very much ahead of that game. And I was listening to Taavi Kotka yesterday in Finland, and he was really he was kicking our ass, I can say you. And also, it means that we need to also look at the cities and how can we transform the experience that we can create for our citizens with different kinds of city services. So basically, examples are across the different industry landscape. And what is really the key here is the level of disruption. And I think there is always the question of, okay, what is then the opposite for not starting to embrace digitization? It's basically getting out of business. It's what we're saying and what we're seeing in the market and the different research shows, it's basically digitization or die. So it is something we need to take seriously, and I think most of you are already considering to some level at least your digitization strategy. So what we're seeing is that approximately 25% of the companies or cities or countries are having some level of digitization strategy. Typically today it is about presentation or a vision paper that is defining where you want to go as a company. But that's good. Anyways, 25% are having that thought actually in their minds and in their business strategy. But what is concerning is that 75% doesn't have anything. And that's really something I would like to kind of like leave with you, that, okay, in which category do you belong to, and how can you start at least thinking about the vision, how you can start embracing that. And the key trends that we see as a company, as Cisco, driving this acceleration of digitization is really the number of connected devices. And since we're very connectivity based and we see a lot of the trend emerging, we can see that this growth is exponential. So by 2020, we will have 500 billion smart items, things connected to the internet. And they are something that you would not consider today as even being possible to connect. And also at the same time, we're seeing that this connectivity is increasing and accelerating the need for high bandwidth traffic. So we're seeing tripling of the IP traffic by the same time. And what's interesting is that 40% of the whole connectivity will be machine to machine, which means that there is no human intervention in between, which means that there needs to be a lot of intelligence in the infrastructure. What is actually the business logic that these machine-to-machine connections will do? And there needs to be a very reliable, secure infrastructure to make sure that this is also being protected. What's happening is that not only are we looking at an explosion of data, we're seeing that data centers are growing and the data volumes are growing, but we're also seeing that there are more and more centers of data. What this means is that when you start thinking about the analytics or thinking about your business processes and how they use the data to make better decisions, it's not the traditional way of thinking, the databases, the different kinds of digital transactions in a centralized library. It is actually different centers of data at the edge of the network. And this is something that we are seeing as a massive opportunity for companies, because when you can start actually virtualizing this data from these multiple sources as one holistic view on that, you can actually start utilizing the data without moving that back and forth to the data center. And that's why we, as a company, we're now investing a lot in terms of how do we build analytics into the network, into the edge, so that you can start actually driving those analytics results already before moving the data back and forth, and yet again increasing the need for additional bandwidth and connectivity. But what this also does is that your threat landscape becomes much more dispersed. So you have basically the exposure all over the place. Those 500 billion devices are actually part of your threat landscape. These centers of data are part of your threat landscape. So we can't think anymore in a traditional way that we always try to protect the data center with the firewalls and the security perimeters, but we have to start looking at the security as a holistic picture where security needs to be everywhere. It needs to be in the data centers, it needs to be in the network, it needs to be everywhere. So what are some of the key challenges for the IT? First of all, as mentioned, we're seeing the traditional approach for data centers. We're seeing the explosion of data. We're seeing more and more requirements for security in the traditional data center environment. We're seeing the need for cloud. We're seeing the need for different kinds of hybrid deployments. So we're not only building our services and our processes around the typical ERP systems or others running our data centers, but we're actually building more and more hybrid environments where we're utilizing public clouds and other cloud providers. And as said, we need to extend the complete architecture picture also to the IoT, to the smart devices, and to the edge of the network. And not to make anything more complicated, but imagine starting to deploy your applications on this infrastructure. How do you start actually managing those applications who will need to interact both with the data centers and with the different cloud applications? And then in the new world, how do you actually start building those next generation applications for IoT, for analytics, for gaming, for other purposes? And how do you build all this together in one IT architecture and IT function? How you manage the services, how you manage the architecture and the end-to-end security. So basically what we're seeing is the tale of two ITs. So we see the traditional cost efficiency, virtualization play in the data center, and at the same time we're seeing the speed and the expansion and the agility in the cloud infrastructures. But more importantly, there needs to be the right balance. So there needs to be the right balance of the cost efficiency, the agility, and the different kinds of scale factors that you can drive with the public cloud. But at the same time, you need to make sure that it's, from the security and data sovereignty perspective, it needs to be well-managed, complete architecture. And what we're seeing actually is that when you start deploying applications to the public cloud, and when you start increasing the workloads and the requirement for high bandwidth connectivity, it also becomes expensive. So there is no one answer to different different application or different use cases, but you need to strike the balance. And this requires that you have an architecture where you can actually move workloads across the public and the private on-premise data centers to really be able to manage this as a life cycle. So what we're seeing today is, of course, you have your traditional infrastructure, your traditional processes, but your end customers, your users, are already starting to demand for more. They demand that they need to get the service right away. And if a person is not able to send a file because of some firewall or other restrictions, they will find a way to send the file, because otherwise they cannot complete their job. So what they do, they go for some sort of a free box application in the cloud. They upload the file there, send a link to the person they wanted to send that to, and there you go, they might be violating your security policies. The other example is, of course, the notorious software developers who want to have this application development sandbox up and ready in a matter of minutes and not a matter of weeks or months. So they go for Amazon or some other public cloud vendor and start actually coding the application there. But of course, again, it is out of control of your IT function to actually make sure that it's consistent with your security policies. Now, we call it the shadow IT, meaning that there's something happening in the company which is related to usage of cloud, and the business units starting to themselves build different kinds of capabilities. And the question is this a problem? Is this sizable enough of problem that you should be starting to address this issue? We've done some interesting research here, and we also have a service called Cloud Consumption Service. It means that we're basically detecting from the network how much you're actually using different kinds of cloud services. And what you can see is quite interesting statistics. So basically, the usage of cloud is typically 10 to 15 times more than the CIO is actually thinking that it is. And in 93% of the cases, actually IT is not even aware that they're being used. So you can imagine the threat and the security concerns what the IT functions will have today if they cannot control this from a holistic IT architecture and service management perspective. So we call the notion of being able to automate the different IT functions fast IT, because you need to be able to create fast response, self-service capabilities for your business users and in some cases for your customers and even in some cases for citizens. So where to start? Really the critical thing first is to understand what are the sets of services that you need to build for your end customers, for your end users. What is the demand that you need to kind of like fulfill with your services, and what are the business outcomes that you want to also deliver to your end users. They can be employees, line of business users, developers, or asset. They can even be some consumers or even citizens. And the ideology what we have today is that you need to build it in a way that the delivery mechanism is almost like an e-store. It's a self-service portal, it's some kind of a service catalog view that you can provide to the end users. And in order to be consistent and automate and make everything very streamlined, you of course need to think about the actual mechanisms, how you then bring that whole thing to life. Meaning, how do you define your service portfolio in the catalog? How do you build the governance so that everything stays very unified when you make changes or introduce new services? How do you educate your people and change the culture within your IT organization, but also within the end users? And how you define the processes, how do you define the change management? You really need to start thinking this from a new perspective. So digitization is not only technology disruption, it is also very much organizational disruption and a very, very challenging change management process that you need to go through. And in between, you need to start thinking about the roadmap. How do you start enabling the architecture and the hybrid model for different kinds of consumption models, for different kinds of use cases? How do you actually connect these these two together so that you can actually enable the mobility of the workloads. And a wrapper around this all is the pervasive security and governance and compliance of the security. An example from Cisco IT. So what we have done in the past few years is that we have basically built ourselves a portfolio of services that we can consume as Cisco employees. So we can go and search for different services in our e-store. So we can go for virtualized machines, we can go for some specific applications, and we can search and find what we need for our purpose. We can choose based on our entitlement and based on our identity what we are allowed to use and what kinds of chargeback mechanisms we need to comply with or we need to be aware of. And then we can start immediately using the service. So basically it's very dramatic change from multiple service use cases and complex steps and processes and long provisioning times to really having the service available within a matter of minutes. And what is really the enabling factor for all of this? What is really the enabling kind of like thing which we can build into our IT architecture enabling fast IT? First thing is to have this continuous delivery tool chain, which means that you need to have the capabilities of finding, searching, basically choosing and deploying the applications. You need to have the consistent architecture, which then, based on those sets of policies, enforces those to the infrastructure in an automated way to actually deliver the outcome. And also there was a reference in the last speech regarding the software-defined networking and software-defined infrastructure. For software-defined networking, we have already 4,000 customers using software-defined networking based on our application-centric infrastructure SDN policy. We have the most broadest ecosystem of partners who are actually complying with our SDN story. It's completely an open API-based architecture, and it is really the thing that has now evolved in the IT landscape and IT technology, which is enabling us to do the complete data center and complete infrastructure automation. And what you need to have is also, you need to think about the different kinds of workloads. As mentioned in my beginning, you need to think about the different kinds of traditional workloads. You need to think about the new kinds of IoT workloads. You need to think about the big data or the analytics workloads, the Hadoops and the others. And you need to build one architecture that is able to support all the different use cases. So the key here is really the architecture. And to have someone within your organization who is really driving the architectural development, understanding the business requirements, understanding what you need to do from a digitization perspective, and translate those into architectural decisions. We have also now recently defined our own digitization strategy. And this starts from the business outcomes. So what is it that we are enabling our customers to use, our customers to consume from our offerings in technology? And as the next layer, we have the different kinds of partners and developers. And this is an area where I challenge all of you to think, who are the partners and developers of your digitization journey? I would bet that you will have different kinds of partners and developers that you haven't even considered that they could be part of your ecosystem. And this is something that we're also experiencing more or less every day. Who are the ones actually developing their own applications on top of our infrastructure using our infrastructure open APIs? Who are the different application vendors, or in some cases they are operational technology, manufacturing, automation process developers and application vendors who are working together with us to define the next generation of their products and enabling digitization. Then of course you need to think about the application landscape. What is it that your business needs in terms of the the business logic and the business processes, and then we come closer to the intelligence in the network or in the data centers or within the endpoints, the pervasive security, one holistic threat architecture, and then also the analytics that you can drive also from the infrastructure. And in the core, you need to have the intelligent, programmable infrastructure that is actually enabling you to do automation. And unfortunately today, we're still living in a very manual, CLI-based world. And when we think about when we're moving towards billions of endpoints and things connected to your networks and your backend systems, we think about the complexity that is coming from the different centers of data and the hybrid models. We can't no longer rely on the manual work, opening the firewall, opening a port. We need to really start building the intelligence and the automation to the infrastructure. So that is what we have today. We already have today a programmable infrastructure where we can start building the automation, really start relying on the different infrastructure components, having that same policy-based programmable interface. But the next step from there is that we're going to see autonomic infrastructure capabilities emerging, which means that you might have an IoT type of use case or application which requires an infrastructure. You deploy an infrastructure and it starts to actually autonomically fine-tune itself, configure itself, find those machine-to-machine connections that it needs to establish when you enter, for example, a new device or new set of application capabilities, controlling those devices. And after that, only the imagination is the limit where the technology is going to go. But I would say that some of the key trends here is absolutely the programmability, the automation for enabling these large-scale deployments and the complexity. It is the security and really thinking about the business outcomes, what do you need to deliver from your IT. So what we're seeing is that it's not only the companies in the traditional industries using IT systems and IT infrastructures. It's really also the government, it's the cities that need to start thinking about, okay, how can we embrace the digitization? We have developed now joint innovation centers across Europe and across the world. So we have innovation centers in Berlin, in Barcelona, and in different places close to the cities who are being very innovative and really want to embrace technology. And also, of course, we're working a lot with the different industry verticals, really thinking what is the digitization strategy, for example, for finance industry, for manufacturing, or for other industry verticals. And the Internet of Everything is not just connecting things to the Internet, but you really need to have the strategy and the plan how you then connect these devices to collect the data. And from the data, you need to have the insight and the analytics to connect that to your business processes, and at the end of the day, have the right insight for the people to make better decisions. So this is what we call the Internet of Everything. And the underlying enabler is the infrastructure, the fast IT, the hybrid model of the different cloud deployment models and your own data centers or your own on-premise solutions, really bringing the IT capability which is able to reflect to the needs of the digitization. And there the pervasive security, software and services capabilities to bring this to life. So basically what digitization means is really a transformation of customer experience. How do we deliver a differentiated user experience or new service to your end customers? And it is about transforming the way we work, how our people are actually doing their work and conducting their job and different kinds of tasks. And it is of course about the business operations. We, for example, we nominated ourselves a new Chief Operating Officer. She used to be our Chief Information Officer, CIO. So IT is becoming part of business operations more and more, and technology is becoming more part of business operations. So that is absolutely what we're seeing also happening. But I'm more than happy to continue this message and to have a bit of a debate with my colleagues later on in the afternoon. I hope this gave you some insights to how we see digitization emerging, and especially when we talk about data centers and also the fast IT and how we can help you to automate, how can you start embracing the software-defined infrastructure and software-defined networking. Please stop by and visit our stand and get hold of our people, and we're more than happy to tell you more about the technologies and the solutions we have there to enable the journey. With that, I thank you, and there will be a lot of questions during the debate. I'm happy to answer those then, but if there's any further questions here, I can definitely take those now. I think we have plenty of time for that.